Hi, welcome to Sterling Heights Public Library. I'm Brent, and today we're going to be making some meatballs to go with that red sauce I showed you how to make a couple weeks ago. Come on down, I'll show you the ingredients here we're working with. Very simple preparation today, really pretty basic ingredients. So we got about a pound of ground beef here, got a couple of eggs, we've got some garlic, onion, some breadcrumbs, some grated Parmesan cheese. We're going to be using a little bit of parsley, some dried basil, a little bit of dried oregano, a little salt and pepper, a little crushed red pepper. This is optional. And probably going to need a little bit of milk, but let's wait and see. Okay, so we're back. Did a little bit of prep work, and we're going to talk about how to mix these things up and get them going at this point. So we're going to start out, we're going to be using two different bowls. We're going to use a bowl for our wet ingredients. That's going to be where our meat's at. And the smaller one here I'm going to use just to mix the dry ingredients. And then we're going to mix everything together. It just helps kind of blend everything a little bit more easily. So we've got about a quarter cup of grated Parmesan, quarter cup of breadcrumbs. You don't have to get picky about exactly what kind of breadcrumbs. This here is the basil. So I've got half a teaspoon measure here. I'm going to do half a teaspoon of basil. This is oregano. Half teaspoon of oregano. Half a teaspoon of salt. These are not a really heavily seasoned meatball. You can always up the seasonings if you decide that you like to. We're going to use a full teaspoon of chopped parsley. And I'm using dried here. You can use fresh. That would be fine. And we're going to use about a quarter teaspoon of black pepper. It's a little harder to measure out of the grinder, so I'm just going to eyeball it. I am going to do about 1/8 of a teaspoon of this crushed pepper. Now the smallest spoon measure I've got is a quarter teaspoon, so I'm going to take about a half of that. This is powerful stuff, so be careful with it. So I'm just going to take, and you'll see that I did take the time to put on some gloves. I don't need that so much for the dry ingredients, those are easy to mix. But when we get into the wet stuff here, we're going to be getting a little messier. So we've got our ground beef, we've got our onion here. I did a pretty fine chop on this. That worked out to about it's a little more than half a cup. I'm going to add that in right there. I've got about a teaspoon of finely chopped garlic here. I had small cloves, so I used several of them. Bigger cloves, you probably only need one or two. And got a couple of eggs here. So try to crack those right in. Like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and get this here kind of mushed together. And I may need to add a little bit of milk to this just to give it a little bit more wet. We'll know a little more about that once we start getting the dry ingredients mixed in there. Now you don't want to overwork a meatball mix, because if you spend too much time messing around with it, the meatballs are going to get tough. Okay, so our wet ingredients are pretty well mixed in there. Take a moment, dump in the dry ones. Just kind of fold that through. that mix is actually feeling pretty good. If this starts feeling a little on the stiff side, go ahead and add like a tablespoon of milk and just kind of keep working it through a little bit and see if that is enough. You might need a little bit more than that, but usually if you got to add milk, you don't usually have to add very much. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and strip off this one glove here. So meatballs, you can make a ball out of it now, right? Now you can do this completely by hand and just form it with your hands, but if you happen to have a scoop, this works really well. A spoon will also help the portion. One of the great things about doing it this way here is it keeps your meatballs a nice even size. You don't have to make these any specific size, big, small, kind of up to you. You do need to keep in mind that the bigger you make them, the longer they're going to take to cook. So just think about that for a bit. Now there's a couple of ways that we can cook these as well. Now, the way I learned how when I was younger, we would saute them in a skillet. And this works really well if you're only making, a dozen or so. But if you're making a big batch, or if you don't want to splatter all the grease around your stove, baking sheet in your oven works really well. A lot of restaurants do it this way. I am going to give that a little bit of a coating with some spray. If you're using fattier beef mix, you might not need quite so much of that, but I'm going to go ahead and just start forming these. One of the other nice things about the scoop is they don't really require a huge amount of forming afterwards either, because they're already mostly round. You don't want to pack these real tight either. Again, that'll lead to a tough meatball. This doesn't take a super long time. It looks like I'm probably going to get about a dozen meatballs out of this pound of meat with this size scoop. This recipe is really easy to make double, triple, whatever. These things freeze really well when they're cooked. So you can make a big batch and use them for all kinds of different things. There's a dozen, and I got one little one, which we're just going to kind of pop over here to the side. And that's probably going to be my snack. So, once we've got these things formed and on our sheet, I'm going to go ahead and pop them into an oven. Which I preheated. That one's set to about 350. We're going to leave those in there for about a half an hour, and that should give us a pretty good run on those. We'll come back and check it out. Okay, so we've got about a half hour gone by. These things are looking pretty good. I'm going to take a temperature on them real quick, and we're just going to see where they're at. So this is an instant read thermometer. You can get these all kinds of different places. All right, yep, so we're there. You want an internal temperature on these things of about 160, 165 degrees. That'll be considered food safe. Now, if you're going to be doing these in a simmer them in a tomato sauce to put with pasta, you don't have to cook them all the way through. You do want to get them set on the outside and a little bit of brown on them. But if you're going to be simmering them, you don't need to take them all the way up at that point. Now, these things here, there's a lot of different things you can do with these. They make great sandwiches. They make nice appetizers, especially if you go with a little bit smaller size on these. gravy, barbecue sauce, all kinds of things you can do with these. One thing, if you're going to be putting these in tomato sauce, that one that I showed you a couple weeks ago, that particular version, if you're going to be simmering meatballs in it, is actually a little bit better with canned tomatoes. So rather than doing the 2 pounds of fresh tomatoes, start out with about a quart of canned tomatoes and make the sauce pretty much the same way. Put the meatballs in it, put the lid on it, simmer them for about an hour before you serve them on with the pasta. I think you're going to like these. This is pretty good. Again, I'm Brent. Thanks for coming.